Well, the year was 1987, and this classic movie was released. For some of you, you're gonna have to think back. For some of you, maybe you miss it, but this classic movie, one of my all-time favorite movies, was The Princess Bride. It is filled with just iconic statements. Some of you you'll know the statements, you just didn't know where it came from. Like the word inconceivable. It's not just the word inconceivable. If you've watched the movie, you know it's inconceivable. Every time I hear that word, I just want to break out into saying it that way. There's this other moment in the movie where this boat was kind of going across the lake, and they'd been rhyming all these words, and you hear one of the characters say, "No more rhyming, I mean it." And then Andre the Giant says, "Would anybody like a peanut?" Love it. There's this other character in the movie, and he has this one phrase. He goes, "My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die." It's a great movie. Some of you are like, "What?" I'm like, you got to watch it. It's amazing. But my favorite scene out of the entire movie was when Billy Crystal comes in, and Billy Crystal is dressed like he's like 900 years old. He looks like an old man. His wife is dressed just like him. You can hardly tell them apart. And you see Princess Bride it's a love story between Wesley and Princess Buttercup. And so they bring Wesley in because they think Wesley is dead. And so they lay Wesley on the table. Billy Crystal's character comes out. Billy looks at him, and they're like, "He's dead." And Billy Crystal goes, "Oh, there's a difference between mostly dead and all dead. You see, mostly dead is slightly alive." Then Billy Crystal's character takes this big apparatus and he shoves it in Wesley's mouth, and he blows air into Wesley, and he walks up to Wesley, who's mostly dead, not all dead. And Billy Crystal asks the question, "What you got here worth living for?" And then he takes his hands and he places it on Wesley's chest, and he pushes down on Wesley's chest, and as the air escapes through his lips, Wesley says, "True love." Billy Crystal's character stands up, and he's almost like he's shocked that true love came out of his lips. And Billy Crystal says, he said, "To blave, to blave." And all of a sudden, Billy Crystal's wife comes running around the corner, and he goes, "Liar, liar. He said true love." You all need to go watch the movie. It's so good, right? Because it's a movie, it's a love story between Wesley and Princess Buttercup. It's amazing. And Wesley was a farm boy. He was a servant boy that served Princess Buttercup's family. And Wesley, he was in love with Princess Buttercup, but in her eyes, he was just, a farm boy. And later on in the movie, Wesley goes up to Princess Buttercup, and he goes, "I've been saying it so long to you. You just wouldn't listen. Every time you said, 'Farm boy, do this,' you thought I was answering, 'As you wish.' But that's only because you were hearing wrong. 'I love you' was what it was, but you never heard." And you see this love story between Wesley and Princess Buttercup. Well, if you know the movie, you know it wasn't a love story between them at all. You see, this movie starts off with a scene between, there's a boy laying in a bed, and Mom opens the door, and Grandpa walks in. Mom shuts the door, and Grandpa sits down on a chair, and, he has a book. And he looks at his grandson, and he goes, I want to read you a story. And the grandson, just being a young boy, kind of has that look of like disdain on his face because he didn't want to listen to Grandpa's story. Grandpa kind of talks him into it, and the grandson finally says, "Okay." And Grandpa opens a book, and there starts the love story between Wesley and Princess Buttercup. And it was the very, very last scene. As the camera comes back to that small little bedroom with grandson laying in the bed and Grandpa sitting next to him, Grandpa shuts the book, stands up, grabs his coat and his hat. He makes his way to the door, and the grandson, still laying in the bed, looks at Grandpa and says, Grandpa, maybe you could come over and read it to me again tomorrow. And as the movie comes to an end, the camera focuses on Grandpa, and Grandpa says, as you wish. See, the movie wasn't about the love story between Wesley and Princess Buttercup. The genius of The Princess Bride is all about the love between a grandpa and his grandson. And what connects with us, even in that iconic movie, filled with iconic scenes and sayings, something within all of us that deeply desires to love and to be loved, isn't it? All of us have this as part of our storyline. I mean, such an iconic symbol, the heart. Every February, every store is filled with red and pink hearts, the sign for love. And the longer we live, you all know this, the utopian feeling and emotion of love starts to look more like this, doesn't it? I mean, we want to be loved and we want to love, but we all know the longer we live, the thing we know is the more difficult love truly is, isn't it? Comments that are said, sides that are taken, trust that is demolished, words that cut deep. I mean, we want to love and be loved, but we all know how difficult this is. That's why the song Shallow was one of the number one songs in 2018. I mean, those two lines, tell me something, girl, tell me something, boy, is a song saying we live in this world and we get how difficult this world is. And I want someone to really listen to me. I want someone to really hear me. I want someone to really know me. I want someone to be with me. Right? When you hear those words, it strikes such a strong emotion within. That's why last week in part 3 of this series, I asked this question. Do you want your marriage to go the distance? And you could replace marriage if you want. Do you want your relationship with your son to go the distance? Do you want the relationship with your daughter to go the distance? Do you want your relationship with your mom or your dad or your mom and dad to go the distance? Do you want your relationship with your best friend to go the distance? Do you want relationships connected within the church context to go the distance, right? Because it's all about relationships. I mean, I know the series has been focused on marriage, but I'm just telling you, it's all about relationships. Do you want your relationships to go the distance? It's a question that my wife and I have asked each other. You see, here's what I know, and some of you know our story. We lost a child years ago. And here's what I know, because I've read all the studies, I've read all the percentages about the number of marriages when they lose a child, the number of marriages that end in divorce. It's staggering. And one of the things my wife and I did when we lost our child, we were just like, no. We're going to be part of a very small percentage of husbands and wives that actually make it. Our commitment is to have a marriage that goes the distance. If you're married, is that your commitment? If you're dating someone and you're thinking about marriage, is that your commitment? Generally in your relationships, is that your commitment? Well, like I shared in part 3 last week of this series, I said we're going to get some great direction of how, yes, for our marriages, but all of our relationships to actually go the distance. And the Apostle Paul, he's going to give some great marriage advice. But here's what's amazing about what Paul wrote some 2,000 years ago. Paul wasn't writing to married couples. He wasn't writing to dating couples. Paul wasn't doing a marriage, seminar or premarital counseling. This wasn't the framework at all. But as we get into some of these words, I'm pretty sure if you've ever been to a wedding, you've heard these words. But these words were not about marriage at all. You see, Paul was writing to a church just like Tri-County Church. That's what he was writing to. And he's going to give some just amazing relationship advice that, oh, by the way, we can apply to parenting, we can apply to parent and child relationships and to marriage relationships and all of our relationships. But he was writing to a church. It'd be like him saying, hey, Tri-County Church, I got some relationship advice. And what Paul does, and this is so masterful, Paul starts off as he's addressing the church, he starts talking about the diversity that's within the church. And this is amazing. I mean, just take a moment, look around you. If you're online, look at different people's names and profile pictures. Here's the thing, we all get this. We spend our day around, diversity, because all of us are different. All of us have different passions and different pursuits. We all have different perspectives. We all have different personality types, right? We all are different, and we get that. We're like, yeah, we're all different. But this is what becomes so difficult. We understand we're all so different, yet we're shocked when someone doesn't, have the same perspective as us. We're shocked when someone doesn't see something just like us. We're shocked when someone acts differently than us. We're shocked when... And what Paul does, before he gets into this great framework to help us have our marriages go the distance, he just says, hey, recognize there's diversity. And then he gives a caution. He says, hey, know there's diversity because every single person is different than every other single person. He says, here's the caution. And this is what he's writing about. Again, to a church, just like Tri-County Church. He goes, hey, recognize that you're all different. And if you're not intentional, and he's talking to you, he's talking to me. If you're not intentional, division is going to enter into your relationships. And we all know what that feels like, don't we? If you're married, have been married before, you know this is true. The thing that you fell in love with your husband, your wife, I don't know if that was a year ago or 50 years ago. Think back to that thing. Who she was, who he was. That thing that just grabbed your heart and you're like, oh, I love that little thing they do. Guess what you grow to hate? Isn't it just true? My wife, Kim, she's incredibly creative. And I love that about her. She's a spunky, full of energy, energetic. I might get in trouble for using the word spunky, but honey, forgive me. And she's just that personality. One of the things we both love together is we both love a clean house. It's not spotless and immaculate, but it's pretty clean. We love a clean house, and we're teaching our kids we're trying to teach our kids how to keep a clean house, but we love having a clean house. It's just one of those things that we connect on. But we have different definitions of what clean means. My personality is such that I will say, everything, every object needs to have a place, because if that object has a place to put it back in, guess what happens? It always goes back there. It's just part of my personality. Some of you might call it a psychosis, but it's my personality type. My wife's idea is as long as she can't see that object on the kitchen counter, it's clean. So we have drawers filled with surprises. There's some drawers we can't even open up. And early on, this would frustrate me. I'm not saying this still doesn't, but I've gotten better because what I've realized is, guess what? Just like I like to have every object in its place, she likes to put every object in one drawer and the next drawer and the other drawers. And if I'm not careful, diversity will lead to division. It happens all the time. Happens all the time. And that's what Paul was writing about. Again, not to a marriage conference, not to helping someone date better, not premarital counseling. He was like, hey, church, you're diverse. That's awesome. But be careful. Because in that diversity, if you're not intentional, division is going to happen. And it happens all the time in every church around the world. Why? Because we recognize we're diverse and tell. And then Paul writes something so powerful. He goes, I'm going to show you the most excellent way. The excellent way to what? To ensure that division doesn't break through diversity. To ensure that unity keeps people together. He's like, I'm going to show you the most excellent way. And this is the way. To embrace diversity and keep unity. And this goes for the church, a gathering of people, and it goes for marriage, and every relationship in between. And Paul starts to write what this most excellent way is. And he writes, love is. Now, we have one word for love in our English language, and that word is love. I know I just blew your minds on that thought. In the Greek philosophy, the Greek language, they had 4 main words for this one word, love. And this gets a little complicated because we just write love, but the Greek language, they had 4 main words: agape, philia, storge, and eros. Eros is a me-centric type of love. It can even bridge into a sexual type of love, but the sexual type of love, again, is all me-centric. My needs. You have to fill me, my needs. Storge is a family connection type of love. It's a love that you have for a mother or father, or if you are a mom or dad, your love for your kids. It's a love for your grandparents. And here's what's interesting about storge, and some of you really get this. Even in very fractured families, my dad grew up in a family very, very fractured. There's still a love for his mom and dad and for his stepmom and stepdad, even though those relationships were so horrific. There's still a family connection, a family love. That's storge. And storge and eros aren't found in our New Testament Bible. Those versions of the word love aren't there. Now there's a version of storge, but I won't get into all of that. It's kind of the opposite of that, but by themselves, those 2 words aren't in our New Testament Bible. Now the other 2 versions are in our New Testament Bible. You see, philia is a friendship type of love, but this is mutualistic. This is kind of a transactional in a way, and we get this in our friendship relationship, right? In friendship relationships, we just know like you got to be a friend to get a friend, right? We know that. We've been saying that to our kids, like you got to be a good friend to be a good friend. You're going to get a good friend, but we just know that it's a transactional type of love. But the highest form of love in the Greek language and the Greek philosophy is this word agape, which is selfish, unconditional. It was the peak of love. And Paul, when he writes love is, he writes agape. That is the pursuit, not the other loves. Paul very specifically says, no. This type of love that I'm talking about is a selfless, unconditional, agape type of love. And he writes, love is patient. And I think it's so powerful that he starts with patient. Patient means that you go at the same pace as your spouse. Patient means that if your spouse is going through a difficult time, you slow down. Or if you're going through a difficult time, your spouse slows down. My wife and I, over the years, we've had different paces of life where I'm struggling with something or she's struggling with something. And the goal of love is to pull back, to slow down, to be in pace, to be in step with your spouse. Patient means if that person hurts you, that you're just going to be patient with them, just like God is patient with you. Love is patient. Love is kind. Kind is all about God's kindness to you. That God is a kind God. And because of his kindness, not because we deserve it, because he's kind, now his goodness goes into motion. And he shows us goodness, that love is kind. Love does not envy. And envy shows itself in marriages all the time. Envy is all about looking at someone, saying to yourself, I wish I was like him. I wish I was like her. I wish my personality was like. I wish I had the competency like. I wish I could make the money like. I wish I could have a relationship with like. That's envy. Looking at someone and saying, hey, I wish I was like. And here's the thing. The only antidote to envy is this, is to celebrate that person. Husbands and wives, listen to this. The only way to counteract envy is to celebrate out loud your spouse. It's why I've told countless people over the years that my wife, Kim, is a better leader than me. She just is. I know some of you are like, why can't we get her on stage? She just is. I watch her lead. I watch her lead within a church context. I watch her lead within the sports teams and the schools context. I watch her lead all the time. And when I watch her, I'm just telling you, and it's not envious. I'm just wanting you to know, I'm celebrating the fact that she is such a gifted leader. Her ability to connect with people she knows and people she doesn't know. The only remedy for envy is you say those words out loud. And I mean it with all my heart, because I've said this from stage and I've said this individually to people. I'm like, hey, you really should choose Kim, not me. She is a phenomenal leader. Do you brag on your spouse publicly when your spouse is with you and when your spouse isn't with you? Love does not envy. The next two are linked together. Love does not boast and love is not proud. Our simple definition of pride, right? Pride powers up, and it's two actions. Pride powers up while we push someone down. That's the image of pride. Pride always powers, we always power ourselves up. And as we power ourselves up over someone, we are shoving them down. That's why when your goal is to win an argument, it's pride. It's not coming together to try to heal, try to resolve, to try to understand, try to hear. It's all about pride. You're powering up because you want to win. I know it's true for me. And love isn't. Love isn't boastful. Love isn't fueled with pride. And every time you feel, and you can feel it, every time you're powering up while you're pushing someone down, you got to say to yourself, that's not love. That's not love. That's not love. Love is not dishonoring. It's not dishonoring. Love is honorable. So let me ask this question. When your spouse isn't around you, when you're talking with a friend of yours, are your words about your spouse honoring or dishonoring? No matter how frustrated you are, no matter what your spouse did or did not do that day, I'm just saying, are your words, when your spouse isn't around you, are those words honoring or dishonoring of your spouse? Love is not self-seeking. What does that mean? Love is not self-centered. Love is not selfish. Now, if you're dating someone and you just think about the last 5 dates, you've only done what she wanted to do, you've only done what he wanted to do, I'd find someone else. Think about that in marriage. Husbands, doesn't matter if you really like or don't like to do something. I don't get this right all the time, but I've worked really hard on this, where I've learned how to love garage sales. Is that the number one thing I want to do on my day off? No. But here's what I know. My wife and I, we can do it together We can have fun finding great deals together. I can see the joy on her face when she buys something else, which means we're gonna have to find something else in our house to sell at a garage sale. I love those moments. And guess what? I've learned over time. I kind of enjoy them now, most of the time, right? That's love. Husbands, do you just say yes to your wife because you know it's something she likes to do? Wives, do you say yes just because you know your husband is something he likes to do, whether or not you like it or not? Love is not self-seeking. Love is not easily, and here's a key word. We all get angry. But love is not easily angered. Love just doesn't fly off on the smallest thing. Love just doesn't lose control because. Is that you? Your spouse makes one comment and you redline it. It's not loving. And now this one is probably the most difficult for, I want to say, all of us. It keeps no records of wrongs. Think about the last fight you had with your spouse. Think about the last fight you had with the person you're dating. What started it, you don't remember. But what happens? A whole list of what they have done over the last 50 years of life. Some of you are like calling mama, hey, what did your son do when he was 4? I want that intel. Right? Love doesn't do that. Love doesn't keep a record of wrong. No matter how small that wrong is, you didn't put the toilet paper on the right way. Or how big the wrong is. There's no qualifiers, it's just that it doesn't keep a record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with truth. And think about these two words, truth and evil, in this way. Truth is the guardrail, the framework that God has designed for us to live. This is why Jesus came full of truth and grace. Truth is all about living within God's guardrails. And everything outside of God's guardrails is evil. That's what evil means. It's just outside of God's plan for your life, for my life. It's outside of God's framework for your life, for my life. And Paul does something so good. We miss this in the English language. You see, the word delight and rejoices has the same root Greek word. I mean, this could literally read, love does not delight in evil, but delights with the truth, or does not rejoice in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It's the same way, but in our English translation, they separate it out just so it looks better. But you can you can translate this Greek word both as delight and rejoices. But Paul does something so powerful in the Greek. When it comes to this one Greek word that we translate rejoices, he adds a preposition to it, which means, but rejoices together. You see, that's the power of doing life together. You see, when you're delighting in evil things outside of God's framework, that almost always happens by ourselves. It's why our thoughts are so powerful and destructive if we don't hold them captive and get them out of our mind and say, God, this is dark. Evil happens by ourselves in our darkness, in the darkness of our thoughts in our lives. But Paul goes, hey, but when you rejoice, that's together. And we rejoice. That's why we say life is better together. Life is always better together. That's why we've been talking about life groups now for the last couple of weeks. Just challenge people, like, do life together. Because it's within the framework that God has designed us to do life. Paul writes, love is, it always protects. That's a covering, that's a shield. Husbands, are you protecting and covering your wife? Wives, are you protecting and covering your husband? I had someone walk up to me this week. It was such a cool moment. She walked up to me, gave me a hug, and she goes, I just want you to know there's a whole group of us. We love you, and we are here to protect you. And I tell you, it was such a cool moment because she used both of those words, and she looked at me and goes, I just want you to know we love you and your wife, and we are here, and we are protecting you. Love always protects. Love always trusts. And trust means seeks the best in someone. Do you spend more time complaining about people, or do you spend more time seeking truth within them, what's best within them? Their diversity, which is amazing, even though they see life different than you. Love always sees the best in people. Love always hopes. Not some false, optimistic view of your relationship. No. What Paul was writing here is love, it can never fail. So even though today might be difficult, there's tomorrow. And no matter where your relationship is now and how fractured it is, there's always tomorrow. That's why the Bible talks about that God will give us enough for today. For today. And then he says, wake up tomorrow, and he's going to repeat the process. That's love that is filled with hope. Saying, hey, today might be difficult, but God will help you get to tomorrow. And for some of you, your marriage right now, it is on a razor's edge. I just want you to know that love, hope, saying, hey, today is as difficult as it can be, but I'm holding on to hope, and God is the source of hope. And tomorrow, God will give us what we need to get through that day, and I'm going to hope for the next day, and God will give us what we need for the next day. Love always hopes. And love always perseveres. See, this type of love, not an emotive, fleeting, transactional love. No. This is the love that God embodies, how God loves you. This type of love, it never fails. Never. And that's the type of love God has for you. You see, this love, it's at the epicenter of the mutual submission competition. This type of love is what drives the mutual submission competition. This type of love, everything that Paul wrote down, is the framework for the mutual submission competition. Well, every part of the series, I've given a warning. In every part of the series, the warning was vastly different than the other parts of the series, and I have one more warning that I want to give all of you, especially if you're married. No matter how long you've been married, no matter how many times you've been married, for all of you who are married. But this warning is also for you if you're dating someone right now, thinking about getting married. Years ago, my dad, my mom would teach marriage classes. And I grew up just in a house where I would walk through as a small boy, and I grew up as a middle school boy and a high school boy, and my mom and dad were the parenting people, and then they became the marriage people, and I would have to think thousands of people over the course of my childhood went through their classes. And I remember from a small boy into my high school years, and then right before I got married, my dad would teach this one small piece of wisdom. And I just want to leave this with all of you, because this is at the essence of love never fails. My dad would take a napkin and he would draw a triangle on that napkin. And he would look at me and he would say, hey, son, you just got to understand this. This is the best marriage advice you will ever get. He goes, at the top of this triangle is God. On one side is you. The other side is Kim. And if you want your marriage to thrive, if you want your marriage to go the distance, if you want to have so much joy, even in the dark valleys within your marriage, because this is it. He goes, the more you understand God's love for you, the more Kim understands God's love for her, the more you grow in not just understanding God's love, but now living out God's love, the closer you two will grow together. See, as Christ followers, if you're a Christ follower, I just want you to know, your pursuit is a life of obedience, living a life within God's framework. And the more you hold on to God's kindness to you, his goodness to you, his patience to you, his forgiveness to you, and the more you live it out, it's both ways. I'm just telling you, if you're married, if you're dating, the more you grow in understanding of God's love for you, and the more you extend that love to the other person, the closer you will grow together. You see, that's the mutual submission competition. The question is this: as we bring this series to a close and a new round starts, are you going to choose to live it out? Are you going to choose to live it out?